Now I'd like to take you through our process of finding a homestead because I think it'd be quite useful, and it's really a dream for so many people. And many of you watching, whether you're an individual or a couple or a group of people like us, may be wondering how to actually go about it. Now, especially if you've ever only rented, owning or co-owning a piece of property and then figuring out that process is such a big learning curve. So what I'd like to do is share some of the things we discussed in advance, the skills we had to flex and develop along the way, and also some of the cool tools we use to help us find our homestead. So the first step is find out who you're building your homestead with. I mean, this seems simple, right? Now, if you're an individual on the market, it obviously makes it really easy because you're your own person and you know what your capabilities and interests are. Now, this gets a bit more complicated if you're doing this as a couple or a family or as a group or small community of people like we're doing, because then you have to not only try to see if everyone is on the same page, but you need to come up with ways to check in with one another and then make decisions as a group and really force yourself to think about long-range plans and also worst-case scenarios. So even though that first step seems like a no-brainer of finding out who you're going to start your homestead with, it's really packed tightly with a lot of complicated stuff. And even if you're just two people, you really need to have that discussion of what you both want. Now, we have friends who live on a farm here, and the husband would have preferred to live off the grid, really deep in the woods, but the wife was like, no way. She wanted some level of amenities and also a community for her kids to socialize in. So it's important that whomever you are building your homestead with, that you're really on the same page. And this was also the same for us. We actually started with 4 people in our group, but as we were going through the process, one of our friends decided that it was too soon for him to commit to such a big life decision, which we totally get. And what's great is that he really had that self-awareness and honesty with himself and us to bring that up. And because we weren't so far down the road in our process with signing legal documents and the like, this wasn't such a big deal on paper, but it did mean that we had to reevaluate how much we would have to spend on the homestead because we would be then splitting this 3 ways instead of 4 ways. So I would say the second step is, after figuring out who your partners will be, is really map out your vision for what you're looking for. And this step may naturally come to some, and our group happens to be all creators and really highly visual people, so showing inspirational images and jointly contributing to some Pinterest boards is super helpful. And maybe you even create a keynote presentation that shares your overall vision to the other members of the group. So if you do those things, then at least you have a palette to play with and you could compare ideas with one another. But it's also worth it to put your overall goals or your vision in writing so that you really have this foundation for which you can all agree to. And I found that this is actually helpful for even when we started doing written agreements and documents between members, because if you're coming in as a group of people like we were, in a way the vision mapping is the starting blocks for the group because it ensures you're all on the same wavelength, you're all starting from the same place. And our vision for the property actually became the 4 tenets of our manifesto, which are provide a lifetime access pass to a higher quality of life. And what we mean by that is we really want to build a place where we can have a higher quality of life and lower long-term costs. So we might have to spend a little bit more upfront, but together, we are sharing in the cost. And for us, it was really about access and not ownership. And when we started to remove that idea of ownership out of our minds, it really got us into a really good place to be able to make decisions between one another. The second tenet we wrote down is that we really want to build a strong community, and not only for ourselves, but for the greater community around us, which comes into play a lot when finding the right land for us. So just pin that, because I'm going to come back to that concept again. But the core of this tenet is that we are there to help and support each other. And we really think of ourselves here as hosts and not owners. It's kind of going back to that access and not ownership type of thing. And then, can we provide and not necessarily take? So is there a way that we could build value for the surrounding community as well as for ourselves, and in turn kind of build more value for ourselves by being part of this larger, like-minded group of people that have similar values? And then the third tenet for us is really become a creative project that sparks new opportunities. Building this place is just like doing a collaborative personal project for us. And the idea is that this project creates a more supportive environment for us to produce the work that we love to do, and it may actually spur new opportunities in the process as well by us doing it, which is great. And then the fourth one would be being stewards of our environment. And this is such an important one for me in particular, because I love the environment. I'm a kid of nature. And we see this really as an opportunity to build a modern day model, harmoniously bringing together conservation and community and a really collaborative environment. And by doing this, we could share our idea of how to live in harmony with nature and do the work that we love while increasing the quality of our lives and those around us to the highest of standards. And this may be measured in the quality of interactions we have with nature and the greater community. We're not exactly certain, but those are the things that we're really thinking of. And those are the tenets that we really wrote down from our vision boards. So you could see, as you map out your vision, this will really allow everyone to be on the same page and be something that you could work towards together. Just having a vision or a dream, as you can imagine, isn't really adequate enough to get to the next step, which is to say all the logistics. So I would say the third way, or the third step of finding your homestead, is what can you afford individually and as a group? Now, you have to have this conversation sooner rather than later. And this could be a really sobering discussion, because I think when my friend approached me, I think he assumed I was able to throw down some coin, or maybe I shouldn't assume that on him. But the reality was I was just about to pay off all my student loans from college and would finally be debt-free, which is amazing. But the idea of going in on a property together seemed like such an awesome idea. But if I wanted to go in equally on the deal, financially speaking, then I'd have to really come up with a plan to do so. So this is where it's a bit easier if you're buying a property as an individual or as a couple, because you could take out a mortgage, and at the moment, mortgage rates are actually quite good. However, if you're doing this as a group, a personal mortgage is not an option. So you'd have to structure it differently, like as a business, which is what we did. And then you could do something like a commercial mortgage, but that usually doesn't have as favorable terms as a personal mortgage. And like any loan from a bank, it requires a lot of paperwork. And it also naturally adds a lot of time to the buying process. I think our real estate agent said it would probably add another 3 to 6 months, so it's quite a lot. So we knew for ourselves that we wanted to put in equal funds to start. So that would mean that I would need to dip into the money that I started to save up, and anything else I didn't have, I would need to take out some type of personal loan. Now, you may be able to do that with the bank, or a family, or a friend if you're lucky, or maybe it means you have to put in a lot more work hours, or become a radical saver, or all of the above, which is kind of what I did. And in my case, I also asked a friend for a loan, which admittedly can be very uncomfortable to do and not something I would personally advise someone to do, but for me, I felt the opportunity was just too great and my earning potential could be pretty good. So now that I had paid back my student loans and was already starting to save, I could share that with my friend. And I was prepared to really take that risk and make the loan offer to my friend favorable too, which means putting together official paperwork and signing on the dotted line and making good on our promise that we had for one another. So, I mean, this is all to say most of us do not have unlimited funds. So having that uncomfortable conversation on what each can put in financially speaking is really important. And if you do go that route where you have these unequal partners, financially speaking, then you have to come up with some more creative solutions for that. Like maybe one partner becomes the manager of the property and is required to do more work there and then earns his or her shares out over time, kind of similar to a business. Or maybe there is like some payment plan with interest that he or she ends up putting in more over long term because he or she wasn't able to pay it all up front. Or maybe the business then pays that person's part up front and then he or she is in debt to the business and she pays off over time. That kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. The reality is you really have to have that conversation with one another and work it out between you because what works for us won't necessarily work for another group. All right, this brings me to number 4, which is you have to determine your legal structure and then draft some documents. For example, like a partnership charter or like an operating agreement. And you need to put everything in writing. I'm going to say that again. Please put everything in writing because going into a property together is a big life decision. And you don't want to be put in a situation where you said, well, remember like on such and such a date you agreed to this and another person says, no, I never said that. Now, if you just do everything in good faith or handshake, even if you are good friends or your partners, it could get really ugly. And not everyone's always good at communicating to one another very well. So do yourself a favor and put everything you can possibly think in writing all up front. Think about all those worst case scenarios. Think about things that may be really uncomfortable for you. And I promise you, when you actually start doing that, you actually become better friends, or you begin to realize, oh, maybe this isn't for me. So for us, we actually went beyond traditional legal structures and we did something that was called a partnership charter, which is really designed to help us better understand ourselves. So we went through things like personality tests, what our biggest fears were, what are our expectations for ourselves and for one another, and all these like worst case scenarios. For example, like what happens if one of us unexpectedly passes? Or what happens if one of us gets married and then has a divorce? What would that mean for a shared property? So depending on how you answer these questions, that could also help determine how you want to structure your operating agreement and relationship with one another. Now, the agreements are some of, I would say, the most laborious parts of the process. And for our group, it was like pulling teeth, having to think through all these scenarios. And some of members of the group are like a little ADHD, so like just sitting there and talking about it is like a little painful. But if you do it, it is so worth it. And out of my group, I ended up taking the lead on drafting all the documents. And when we presented them to our lawyer, she seemed actually quite impressed that the amount of thought and groundwork that we had laid out for one another, which brings me to another important side point. If you're trying to be cost conscious, then it's really good to draft up as much of the legal documents as possible because it'll save on legal bills, which can easily rack up in the property buying process because lawyers are so expensive. They really are. But now that like we have these legal documents that are out of the way, and if you are going through the process and getting legal documents out of the way, then you could really start to breathe easier and then start digging into some of the fun stuff again. Which I would say brings me to 5 is another fun thing, I think, is like what community, what landscape or property, geographical location, and really physical features are important to you individually and as a group. So some of this may have come out in your Pinterest boards or mood boards or your keynote presentations and the imagery that you've been saving. But again, I always think it's good practice to jot down what you're looking for, not only in this stage of your life, but imagining what you're going to be looking for when you're older. And why I bring up age is because you see this a lot, maybe in our parents or our grandparents, but they often want to move to a warmer climate or downsize or the like, even when we were looking for property here, like there's a lot of older people selling their property and they're like, hasta la vista, I'm heading somewhere else. So you almost have to look at your forever property, if this is going to be your forever property, as future proof. So you force yourself to look at yourself now and then yourself like 30 years from now and say, okay, or like 50 years from now, God willing, so how am I going to be interacting with the property and the structures on the property when I'm older and maybe my hips are not feeling so good and don't want to be going up and down stairs, for example. So I think a really good strategy is have all members of your group get your own sticky note pads, and maybe everyone has a different color, and then give each other 3 to 5 minutes to write down all the qualities of an area or a property that you want. Then after you're all finished, go one by one to like slap those up on a board or a wall somewhere. And if there are any like repeats or overlaps, then you could just group those together. This is kind of what we do when I consult and do design sprints. It's just like quick thinking, and then you slap those ideas up on the board and you're like, okay, which ones from a gut instinct says these are the ones that we want? And I'll give you an example, like really tangible examples. Things that were really important to us were having a really interesting topography or terrain. So we didn't want just anything that was like flat. An outlook point is interesting too, and having access to like nature. So if there were state parks or national parks in the area, water on the property, very important to us. We were really looking for 30 plus acres because we were going to have 3 to 4 families on the property, and then we want a community space. We were looking for things that were around 50 to 70% forested because we love forests and we'd love to have that on the property. And we preferred some infrastructure, so like wells and things like that, but it didn't have to have the infrastructure. We like the idea of a small town feel, maybe like some historic towns, but still very cosmopolitan. We wanted an area that would potentially be closer to the road. And this is where I said, remember when I said pin that in your hat? So we want to open this up to the community, but also have a place for our community. So an area close to the road where the greater community could come, but then something where we could keep our homes away further from the road was really good. That would be ideal. And then also, my friend said, I'm probably gonna have a lot of kids. We have to have good schools. So that was something else that, again, in a future proofing it, like imagine yourself 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, right? So those are some of the things that, we put up on our Post-it notes, came together, and then we were able to articulate this because we had it in writing, not just visuals, but we were able to articulate that to a real estate agent and our friends. And initially, when we were looking for property, we kind of were looking everywhere, which didn't really help. So we decided that proximity to New York City would actually be good, since many of us still have businesses there, or some of us have some real estate there that, we live there essentially. But that's still a pretty wide net that you're casting, because then you have New York, you have PA, you have New Jersey. And, I really ruled out Pennsylvania because there's just so much hydraulic fracturing there. I grew up, it was like coal community, hydraulic fracturing, and I personally really wasn't into that. So I think I kind of swayed my partners to a place where there wasn't so much like mineral extraction or oil extraction from the ground. And then one of the things that was also super important to me was having a really engaged community. And I personally loved the community around Cornell University. And obviously around universities, you get a lot of academic types and maybe a little bit more of a cosmopolitan vibe. So that really felt right to me. So that's why we started to home in on the Finger Lakes area. And then we ended up just renting a car and then driving around to the different places in the Finger Lakes. And what felt right for us as a group, we would just talk about as we were driving around, and we're like, ooh, wow, this town feels right, or this town feels a little touristy. And then you kind of get the vibe as you start to drive around and see the region. All right, so number 6, I would say is, at this point, once you find where you're going to be geographically speaking and what property attributes should be or that you like, you should be looking at property online if you're not already, because we were started to look on property online even before some of these ideas, but I think that this is the right time to actually do it. So if you think you're not going to be buying in like 2, 3, or 4 years down the line, still get into the habit of looking for property on places like Realtor.com or Trulia or Zillow. And we even went to sites that are more focused on like farm and hunting lands, like NewYorkLandQuest.com. There's a number of others, but we even did searches on Craigslist. We talked to neighbors, and we just started to ask around in general, because we figured the more people who knew we were looking for the qualities that we were talking about, like 30 plus acres, maybe farmland, some infrastructure, interesting topography, then the closer we would be to actually find a property. So oftentimes you kind of want to hold on to your ideas, but it's actually best to be able to push it out there into the world. Now, the sites that I mentioned, like Zillow and Trulia and Realtor, they are great because you can really set your parameters for what you're looking for. So on Realtor.com, it's probably the most detailed out of all of them, because you could specify whether you're looking for farmland, the age of the home, so you could actually increase the age of the home if you want to find old farmland, or if you want more of a modern day home, then you could like reduce that age. And really like just stuff like that. You could say, oh, I'm looking for a home or foreclosure or whatever it might be. Trulia and Zillow, they also let you search via some parameters as well. And then what we did is we set up notifications so that whenever something within our parameters, which I believe we had over 10 plus acres and we were looking for both like a home and land, we would just get notified. And we also set up shortcuts to those sites, like on our computers with those parameters, so that basically as soon as we woke up in the morning, we got into the habit of just checking every day and seeing if there was anything that was remotely interesting to us. And then we could actually send it to our real estate agent or reach out ourselves or whatever it might be. If you have a real estate agent, you do it through your real estate agent. But that's like one way of being able to get, to just be like, stay on top of the real estate market. And, if you feel like you're not going to be looking for a while, or you feel like you're not going to be buying for a while, or you don't even have the capability of buying, I would say still look, because the reason being is your dream property might pop up sooner than you know it. And then you have to make a decision as to whether you want to act on it, or it may take a lot longer than you expect. And both of those actually happened to us. Firstly, I found a property that was just to die for. It was really our dream property because it checked the box on all fronts. But then, as we started down the process, we realized it had a very restrictive conservation easement on it. And we tried everything that we possibly could to figure something out with like the owner and the conservation group. And even though that the conservation easement was written in a very antiquated manner and they would have done it very differently now, there was just no wiggle room. So that, in our minds, started a very terrible breakup process for us. And it was really hard for us to find another property that we liked more. And it actually took over a year for us to find another one. And when the one we ultimately got went on the market, we were far more decisive. So we purchased it during the pandemic, and I have a sense that if we even waited on it even, like 24 hours longer, we would have totally missed out on the opportunity. So it's important to always be looking. ABL, always be looking. All right, now I feel like I got a bit ahead of myself. So let's back up to discuss what some of those search parameters were that we use, because I think I mentioned this, like we were choosing that 10 plus acres because we knew we wanted some elbow room, so to speak, on the land, because we were 3 to 4 parties. And then we were looking for a property within 20 miles of town, because we knew we'd likely make weekly trips to town and we didn't want to be too far away, because a half an hour kind of felt a little bit like too far out of our minds. But however, whatever you think your outer boundary is, like we said 20 minutes or a 20-mile radius, do yourself a favor and just add 5 miles or 5 minutes to that. Because when we did that, we actually found our dream property. And it was still like under that 30-minute mark, but it was in this like kind of purgatory zone that we weren't looking for. And as soon as we just widened our scope a little bit more, we found it. And that was amazing for us. It was a life changer. So, what are we doing?
We are driving on the property for the first time in a long time. And it's fall this time.
It's fall, and it is the last walkthrough that we'll do before we actually transfer the funds to get the property.
Look at all this growth.
All right, step 7, we're getting close to the finish line. After you're like really on top of your real estate game and you know where to look, you can get a real estate agent. And I think we needed one for our first property together, but knowing what we know now, we'd likely not get another real estate agent again, and instead just rely on a real estate lawyer. Because what we found out is that real estate agents don't always guide you in the way you need, and they end up taking a percentage on the end. So, and they take the percentage no matter if they did an adequate job or not. And we started to really quickly realize that if we weren't on top of it, asking questions and relying on other friends who have been through the process, like my friend Paul was integral in helping us through this. So was my dad, so was my friend Damon. Like there were so many people who have been through this process that really guided us. Like we would have been in a really bad place if we had to rely solely on our real estate agent. And look, I'm not trying to knock real estate agents because you might have a really, really good one, but ours like kind of was really good in the beginning and then just was like checked out in the end. And I think it was just like over time, we were looking for 2 years, so they might just kind of get sick of you. Who knows? And we ask a lot of questions. And we also, for us, we also tried to do a lot of research on properties that we liked up front. And there are lots of tools we use to get a sense of the properties. Some of the tools we used was Google Maps and Google Earth, Google Satellite. It was like really good. So you could get all these satellite views and then find what areas are more interesting and had elevations that you were looking for. Because if you remember, one of the things that we said that we wanted is interesting topography and an outlook point. So we were looking at slope of land and how high certain land was. And then that really allowed us to hone in on certain areas even more so and have a much more granular appeal. Like when we were looking at the Finger Lakes, we started to zone in on 3 areas within the Finger Lakes, which is like very good because then we were much more directed on what we were looking for. Some other tools that were really useful that we saw one of the real estate agents using is something called OnX Hunt, which, believe it or not, it's a hunting app, but it maps out all the property lines, who owns what property. Not all of it's like up to date, but it's really useful, especially if you're walking the land, to know where your boundary ends and begins, which we would just pull out the app and we're like, okay, the property line is this way, because sometimes it's not always distinctly marked, especially if you're walking in the woods. And yes, I would totally recommend visiting land and doing your due diligence in advance. The other tool that was really cool, similar to OnX Hunt, was acre value. And this is not something that I'd pull up in a mobile app. This is something that I'm using on my desktop. And this actually has soils data and lays that out on your properties in a very beautiful way. And this is really important if you're planning on doing something like farming or starting a Christmas tree farm or something like that. Like, it'll give you a sense as to what soils you're working with to start. There's also like soil app, Soil Web, which is like a little soil app that as you're walking, you could click it if you have service, and you could see what soils are literally beneath your feet. But acre value gives you like the 30,000 foot approach, and it's like super cool, and you could print out the maps or save the maps. It's very good. And it also shows you some of the boundary lines like the OnX Hunt app does, so that's really useful. So between OnX Hunt and acre value, we could also see who our neighbors were in advance. And sometimes this is not always up to date, but oftentimes it is. And then, it'll give the person's first name, last name, or whoever, it's like a tax map essentially, so you could see who's there. And then what we would do is just basically do some background research on that person and see who are the people that are around us, and would we like those people to be our neighbors? So it was a lot of research that we were doing. It ended up being that we were probably doing way more research than our real estate agents, which is why I was saying, like, if we did this again, we probably wouldn't get a real estate agent and just rely on a real estate lawyer. But if I had to look back, like when we were doing when we started to really get into the maps, like on OnX Hunt and acre value, at this point, like, we really got into map making, and then we felt like we needed something more custom. So we started to get into ArcGIS, and then we would like map out the whole area, and we would start delineating boundaries for like state forests or any land that was under a conservation easement or owned by the university, because then we would know that those are like off limits, but those would be things that wouldn't actually be too bad butting up against too if you had your property next to like a national or state forest or some conservation easement land, for instance. I guess like if your real estate agent is like really good and he or she is helping you like take you through the properties, which our real estate agent did. They took us through the properties. They tell you a little bit more about the area. They give you a sense of like, this actually happened for us in the beginning. If there was a property that was going on the market and they thought it was going to be a match, they would actually bring us to that property before it actually went up on Zillow and Trulia, which was really helpful. But I think at the end of the day, don't 100% put your faith in your real estate agent, because no one is going to know better than you what property that you like. So just get active and be proactive in it. All right, so I would say number 8 is, if you're doing all this research, go and visit the properties. In addition to getting like a feel for that overall area, which is what we did, we started driving through the Finger Lakes and stuff like that. It's so vital to get a feel for the property or properties that you're interested in. And when we went to the properties, we really wanted to walk their entirety, to the point that I think it really annoyed the real estate agents. But if it did, who cares? Because this is a huge life decision, and it's basically all the money you've ever saved. So make sure it's right for you. And also, don't just look at the pictures, because then you go to the pictures, you realize that it doesn't look anything like what it looks like now. We went to this one farm that looked really nice in the pictures, and one of my partners got there and was like, this looks like it was bombed out. It was really not a good situation. And so we were like, okay, well, check that one off the list. And we're big believers in actually going to see the property. And because we were in the market like pre-pandemic, and then we got kind of stuck in the pandemic along with everybody else. And then people were buying properties sight unseen. They didn't have any contingencies, which basically are contingencies are the things that you want the seller to check on and to make sure that it's working properly before you actually buy anything, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're thinking of buying a house and then it's like infested with termites, and then you have to get rid of the house, and then you should have not paid as much for it, things like that. So we were in a situation where we were putting an offer down on a piece of property and we wanted to do more environmental research on it. And somebody came in, bought the property sight unseen, and to our knowledge didn't do any inspections and had no contingencies, and to our knowledge didn't even set foot on the property. But in normal circumstances, it's really important to go and see a property, take your time, inspect it, and even chat with the neighbors if possible, which is something else that we also did as well. Like, how do you like this area? What do you like most about it? What are the things that annoy you about the area? Are the neighbors good? There's a lot of times that we were knocking on doors at the neighbors' houses and just asking those questions. All right, 9, we're getting down to the wire, is you make an offer. So once you find a property that you love, make an offer. And this may be well understood, but if you go the mortgage route versus the cash deal, it takes a lot more time to close on a place. So the real estate agents were basically, and my lawyer was basically saying that it may take an additional 3 to 6 months with a mortgage, and maybe even longer with the backlog from the pandemic. So once you make an offer and they accept it, then there's a period of time agreed upon by the lawyers to do the inspections. So that's when you hire an inspector to inspect the buildings, and the sellers should check the wells to make sure that they're potable if there are wells on the property. And if any issues arise in this time period that you delineated within your contingencies, then the buyer can actually back out, which would be us. Like if we said, oh, well, we wanted to make sure the water is potable, and then we found that the water was not potable, we could actually back out, or we could actually do a reduced cost from our initial offer. So luckily for us, we didn't really find any major issues, although we found some issues after we got into the house, and we realized that our inspector could have probably been a little bit more detailed, but those are the things that you learn after you do them. But there was a water line that was leaking that we found in the basement, and because we caught it during the inspection, it was on the seller to actually fix that. And once that actually gets done, guys, it is time to move into your homestead like we did. So after all those items are checked off your list, it's time to just move in and enjoy it. And I have to say, that's actually when the real work starts. And there's so much to do. When you actually own a homestead, it's so different than renting. But I have to say, it's just it's marvelous, because when you're a renter, I get complaints that I have a bird feeder, and in my community garden, you can't plant in the soil, even though the soil is actually perfectly fine because you get it checked. There's a lot of things that could annoy you over time, because it's really not a piece of property that you're stewarding entirely. And so that's part of the beauty of being able to co-own or have access to your own homestead. And I hope that you'll join us and see what we end up building here at Flock, because it's going to be really exciting. All right, guys, I hope you found that video helpful. And we'll be sharing a little bit more of our journey, and also how to navigate the world of owning your own homestead, because I have to tell you, I wish I had some of these resources and these tips at my fingertips when we started. All right, guys, bye.